Okay, so let's get started. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, everybody, whenever you are. My name is Yaser Mirdamadi, and I'll moderate this debate tonight, if God willing. This is the ninth debate held by the Islamic Cultural Center of Northern California, iccnc. The central theme of the 2025 debate cycle is still belief and unbelief in a post-secular era. The session's topic, typically put in a question form, is does the Quran want everyone to become Muslim? To which Dr. Khalid Zaheer provides a positive answer, yes, according to him, the Quran wants everyone to become Muslim, while Dr. Farhad Shafti provides a negative answer, no, according to him, the Quran does not want everyone to become Muslim. So, a brief biography of both debaters. Farhad studied at Islamic Seminary in Tehran, continued with years of self-study and research before completing a second PhD from the University of Edinburgh. His doctorate and outcome of his study under Javed Ahmed Ghamidi critically examines the Farahi school's Quranic exegetic methodology. His monograph, The Farahi School and Reformist Islam, is forthcoming from Routledge. He authored the Exploring Islam website and regularly lectures and publishes in Farsi on the Quran, spirituality, and pluralism. He also holds a PhD, his first PhD in management science, and is an associate professor at the University of Glasgow. So in a nutshell, Farhad's position with regard to the main question of this debate is that the spiritual success of human being is not conditioned on following any one particular religion. The Quran makes it clear that when a community is guided through prophets, this guidance is intended for that community alone. The message of the Quran is therefore local. While it can serve as a valuable source of spiritual guidance for humanity, it is not formulated for that purpose. Dr. Khalid Zaheer is a student of Javed Ahmed Ghamidi. He also studied Quran from Maulana Amin Ahsan Islahi and Dr. Israr Ahmed. He did his PhD from the University of Wales. His dissertation was a critique on Islamic banking. He's affiliated with Al-Mawrid, an institute devoted to the task of doing research on and teaching Islamic studies. He's an imam at the Muslim Society of Gulf Masjid, if I pronounce it correctly, Gulf, Ontario, and administrator and teacher at the Mizan School, again Gulf, Ontario. His position, in a nutshell, is that the Quran declares Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, as the last prophet and the Quran as the fully preserved book of God. It asks the Prophet to let all humans know that he is a messenger of God for them. The message of the Quran is therefore universal. It involves all humanity to believe in it. So let me say two things before going further. First, there will be a short question and answer part at the end of this debate. If you have any question, please write them down in a Zoom chat box and send them to my colleagues. Please keep your question short, to the point, and clear, and specify to whom your question is addressed, if not both. Second, you can use English automatic subtitle by clicking the live transcript button. So first of all, let us see how Dr. Khalid, in his 10 minutes opening statement, provide a positive answer to the question, does the Quran want everyone to become Muslim? Dr.
7
Khalid,
minutes.
the floor is yours.
I guess it's 7 minutes, right?
Yeah, it's 7 minutes. Sorry.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I begin in the name of the God whose mercy is profound, whose kindness is forever. Thank you very much for the opportunity. My basic premise in what I'm going to present is that the Quran, the Word of God, is a clear book. It doesn't make statements that are vague, unclear, or sometimes contradictory. What it says very clearly. So, one of the things that the Quran has mentioned most clearly is what is found in verse 158 of Surah number 7, Surah Al Araf. The beginning part of this verse says, Qul ya Yuhannas, O Prophet, say, O people, Inni Rasulullahi ilaykum jamia. I am the messenger of God for you, towards you, all of you. Now, I do know and I understand and mention it whenever I have the occasion of presenting the Quran, that quite often the Quran mentions its statement and it is meant for a specific group of people. Many statements of the Quran are era specific and many are meant only for a certain group of people. However, there are certain expressions which cannot be confined to any group or any era, like this particular statement. It says most clearly, O Prophet, Qul ya ayyuhan nas, say, O people, Inni Rasulullahi ilaykum. I am the messenger of God towards you, meant for you. Now, had the statement stopped over there, uh, it would have been some reason for my friend Farhad to feel that he has a reason to put across his point of view confidently. But when it says Jamian, really, it I think uh, tilts the issue in favor of what I'm saying. The second point that I would raise in support of this is that in Surah Al Furqan, uh, Surah number 25, the very first verse is mentioning تبارك الذي نزل على عبده تبارك الذي نزل الفرقان على عبده ليكون للعالمين نذيرا. This is the one who revealed, sent down the criterion, the Quran, upon his servant, ala abdihi, that is obviously uh, Prophet Muhammad, may God's mercy be on him, liyakuna lil alamina nazira, so that he may become a warner for the entire humankind, lil alameen. That obviously is clearly mentioning that his message is for all humanity. Uh, we know that there is an important verse in the Quran, verse 40 uh, of Surah 33, Surah Al Hisab, which declares the Prophet to be the seal of the prophets, which is what is understood normally, popularly, as mentioning that he was the last prophet. ما كان محمد أبا أحد من رجالكم ولكن رسول الله وخاتم النبيين. Muhammad is not the father of any of the men amongst you, but he is the messenger of God and the seal of the prophets. That is, the Almighty decided that at the point of time when he came to this world and brought the message of the Almighty, uh, the process of sending messages for the guidance of humankind would come to a finish, a climax, and no further messages are going to be delivered. Uh, Along with it, if you take the arrangement of the Almighty, which says in Surah number 15, Al-Hijr, verse 7, that says, Inna nahnu nazzalna zikra wa inna lahu lahafizun. Indeed, we have revealed this remembrance, that is the Quran, and we are going to ensure that it is fully preserved. Now, on the one hand, the Prophet of God is the last prophet. On the other hand, his message has been preserved. And obviously, the purpose is that this fully preserved message should become a source of guidance for the entire humankind. The entire humankind who have been mentioned both in verse 158 of Surah Al-Araf as well as verse 1 of Surah Al-Furqan. The Quran also clarifies that messengers and prophets do not come just to guide people indirectly by advising them or delivering sermons or lectures. They come very clearly with the specific purpose of being followed, of being obeyed. So, verse 80 of chapter 4, Surah An-Nisa, it says, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَا مِن رَسُولٍ إِلَّا لِيُطَاعَ بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ. And we have not sent any messenger except for the purpose that he be obeyed by the will of the Almighty, by the expectation, the requirement of the Almighty. So, all these verses put together make my case very clear that the message of the Quran brought by Prophet Muhammad was meant for the entire humankind. I do, I do believe that this message will sometimes be presented most effectively and impressively, like it was done by the Prophet himself. And sometimes it would so happen that people will not be able to properly understand what is being said. They will have questions that will remain unanswered, and people will not be impressed.
Mhm.
So I'm not saying that if the message, which is meant for the entire humankind, does not reach each and every person of the world, those who will not believe are doomed. Not
Mhm.
at all. I believe that those who are doing as best as they can, given whatever understanding they have, they will be eligible to the Almighty's mercy and rewards.
Thank you.
But the scope of the message of the Quran and the message of the Prophet is ideally meant for all humanity. So,
Mhm.
just to very briefly state my case, uh, if there were no obstacles, there were no restrictions, and people could understand what the message was, uh, this message would ideally be conveyed to every human being. Every person would accept it and follow what the Quran, what Islam is saying. Something which is practically probably not going to be possible, but obviously we always have to make a distinction between what is ideal and what is practical. I think my friend Farhad actually believes that even ideally Islam should not be presented to the entire humankind, and they should not be invited to accept it as the message of the Almighty for them to follow, which is obviously a different point of view. And I am looking forward to hearing from him. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Khalid. Yeah, actually, he presented a number of scriptural citations to substantiate his position to the effect that the Quran does want everyone to become Muslim. So let us see how Farhad, in his opening statement, substantiate his position to the effect that the Quran does not want everyone to become Muslim. Farhad, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum again, and thank you very much. Thank you for iccnc and Yaser, and special thanks to Khalid, who is coming here and let us share our insights and dialogue. I hope that we end up with some good insights about the concept of pluralism, exclusivism, and inclusivism. First of all, I would like to make two disclaimers. Number one is that I'm not saying that Muslims should not invite others to become Muslim. Every individual has a right to do whatever they want. So that's not exactly what I'm saying. Although I do say that I don't think that is a duty that God has put on the shoulder of Muslims to do that. My other disclaimer is that, yes, my answer to the question is, does Quran want every human being to become Muslim, is no. But that doesn't mean that I believe people should not become Muslim, or that I think there's anything wrong with becoming Muslim. I think almost all of the individuals in this call, including Khalid and myself and Yaser, are not, from the Arabs of Hijaz, and we are Muslims, and I think we are very happy about it. And surely we would like to see more Muslims around us. So that's not what I'm saying. The question, again, I repeat it: does the Quran invite every human being to become Muslim? I would like to start by a little bit of methodological discussion, that when we talk about a subject as important as this, where should we start? I don't think we should start with first individual verses of the Quran, because then we will end up with battle of verses. You bring a verse, I will bring a verse, then perhaps we start discussing about the meaning of the verse, then we will focus on the meaning of particular word in the verse, and at the end of the day, all this discussion will be depending on the meaning of that particular word or particular verse. I don't think that takes us anywhere meaningful. I think we need to start by wider scope, and then zoom into the verses. So I'm going to address the verses that Khalid raised in the next round if I have time, but I want to start from somewhere else. The theology that Quran gives us tells us that that ultimate truth is God who created human being, and He is fair, He sees everything, He knows everything. He's Hakim, He is wise. That theology tells us that in the hereafter, He judges us, and then based on that judgment, He sends us to hell or heaven. And I'm asking myself, if that is true, which is of course true, as a Muslim we believe in that, is the way that the scenario that Khalid is explaining, is that the most wise scenario for guidance of people? I mean, for this particular meeting, which is only 2 hours debate, and God knows how many people are going to visit it, maybe at most 100 people, we had lots of planning, as Yaser knows, to get to this meeting and make sure everything happens the way that it was planned to be done. Is that the same when we look at the way that the storyline and the narrative that Khalid or exclusivist or inclusivist friends are saying? Sending prophets only in one zone of the earth, sending the last one 1400 years ago, giving him a book that is quite difficult to understand. There is not a single verse of the Quran that people do not have disagreement about it. Giving a book that good scholars like Javed Ahmed Ghamidi and Amin Ahsan Islahi, from whom I have learned a lot, are trying a lot to try to show that it has some coherence, it has some beginning and ending, and still there are lots of disagreement about it. And then ending up with a community of Muslims that, like any other community, are very much struggling just to survive, and they have lots of different understandings. Is that the wisest way for God to guide all human beings, if the intention was to guide all human beings with that particular book? I'm not sure about that. In fact, if I think about it that way, I would then question whether God is wise enough, and whether He knows a lot, whether He knows enough, and whether Quran is really coming from God. Fortunately, when I look at the Quran, I find that no, the Quran doesn't say that. The Quran does not make that claim. And instead of just going through verses in a random way, I want to go through verses that I consider them to be some of the principles that the Quran is giving us. Quran establishes some principles for us. Principle number 1 is that the mission of the prophets in Abrahamic religions is a local mission. وكذلك أوحينا إليك قرآنا عربيا لتنذر القرى ومن حولها. 42:7, and slight difference, it has also come in 692. That is the first principle. The second principle, every community have its own guidance. إنما أنت منذر ولكل قوم هاد. 13:7. Principle number 3. God appreciates the importance of language and the importance of the fact that the prophet comes from the same community so that they can understand each other. وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَا مِنْ رَسُولٍ إِلَّا بِلِسَانِ قَوْمِهِ. We do not send a prophet but in the language of his own qawm. لَقَدْ جَاءَكُمْ رَسُولٌ مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ. So the first one was 14:4, and the next one was chapter 9, verse 128. Number 4, God appreciates the diversity of religions, diversity of Sharia, and says that I want it this way. لِكُلٍّ جَعَلْنَا مِنْكُمْ شِرْعَةً وَمِنْهَاجًا وَلَوْ شَاءَ اللَّهُ لَجَعَلَكُمْ أُمَّةً وَاحِدَةً. In other words, in this verse, God explicitly says no to the question of this debate. And the last one, which is just last few seconds, God has given very good news to the followers of other religions at the time of the prophets by praising them and saying that among them there are those who reach highest levels of heaven, and there are many verses about that, which I stop for now because my time is over. Thank you.
Okay, and Farhad also presented a number of Quranic citation to substantiate his position. And by now it should have been clear for all of us that there are a kind of presumably contradicting Quranic verses. Some of them support the position of Khalid to the effect that the Quran is intended to be guidance for all humanity. On the other hand, there has been and there are some Quranic verses, the superficial meaning of it, I mean the Zaheer, shows that the Quran actually intended for a specific community, although it says that that message of the Quran is in line with the monotheistic necklace of the Christianity and Judaism. So now both sides have presented their opening statement. So let us see how Khalid actually brings about his rejoinder. Yeah, Khalid, the floor is yours, please.
So when you tell me that the time so much is left, I don't see anything clearly. What does it mean?
Yeah, there is a timer, and then if you do not see it on the actually monitor, that's fine, but you can hear a kind of
Okay.
beep beep saying that your time is up.
Right. And right now you are giving me 5 minutes, right?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. You see, uh, whatever Farhad has mentioned, uh, it can be explained through the scheme of the Almighty uh, that I have mentioned. I did try to explain that I'm not claiming that if somebody does not accept the message of Islam, he is doomed. But the fact of the matter is that there is a clear message sent by the Almighty through His messenger that has been fully preserved. Something which we do not find happening in case of other prophets that came before him. Uh, the kind of problems that Farhad has referred to, they're always going to be there. No two humans are equal, even if they are Muslims, regarding how much they have been informed about Islam, how good the atmosphere has been. So let's face it, the life that we are living in is a life where there's a lot of diversity. And Farhad has rightly pointed out that the Almighty has alluded to this diversity as one of His signs. So, what we understand from the Quran is that on the one hand, there is a very clear understanding coming from the Almighty in the form of His book, which is most certainly in a certain language. Obviously, it could not have been in all languages of the world. It had to be in a particular language. It had to be in a certain geographical locality. It had to be in a certain era of time. However, that message, I know and I admit that when it gets disseminated uh, to other parts of the world, uh, the the effectiveness does get affected, is diluted. And God has given us this good news. I mean, the good news that Farhad has referred to, wherein other people of other faiths have also been given the good news. Well, I think there's one important thing that the Quran mentions, which to me clarifies everything, is that God wants people to believe and He wants people to do good deeds. And obviously, this belief and the expectation of good deeds is going to be seen in the light of what God has sent through His prophets. But the important thing mentioned in this particular verse, verse number 42, is that God tells us, La nukallifu nafsan illa wusaha. We are not going to hold anyone accountable beyond his potential, beyond his capacity. So the idea is that the message is there. It's the final message in the form of the Quran. It is addressing the entire humanity. What I would say to Farhad is that, what you have referred to, God's fairness, His wisdom, they are all there in the Quran. But how can we not discuss verses? Verses of the Quran are the real message. They are giving us an understanding that this message is for the entire humankind. I do very strongly believe that that doesn't really mean that whoever ends up not being a Muslim is going to be doomed. But it does mean that ideally it should be presented to everyone for everyone to convert to it. Are you saying that my time is finished?
No, no, just 50 seconds
Okay, okay.
remain.
So God's wisdom remains intact. His justice is there, and He is going to, on the day of judgment, ultimately decide on the basis of who knew what and how much, and what was the potential of an individual. And it is He who is the best judge. But there has to be a very clear understanding of the ideal that was to be followed. Obviously, in each case of each individual, the ideal is going to be looked at in the light of the potential, the circumstances of the individual. And God's judgment is going to be the right judgment, and He's going to be fair, He's going to be kind, He's going to be wise.
Lovely. Yeah, perfect timing, Khalid. Thank you very much. So, interestingly, Khalid is trying to reconcile his position, which we can call it maybe inclusivism or exclusivism, with the fairness, because the objection is, if the Quran wants everyone to become a Muslim, but we know that everyone comes from a different background. What about taking people's capacity into account? He tried to say that la yukallifu nafsan illa wus'aha, that capacity and taking capacity into consideration has been recognized in the Quran. Therefore, although the Quran is the exclusive source of revealed truths for felicity, for happiness, but everyone who doesn't accept it, not because he or she is, has a kind of truth seeking resistance, but only because of one's capacity, is not doomed. Okay, so let us hear from Farhad in his rejoinder how he's gonna reconcile his position with the objection raised by Khalid. Please, yeah.
Thank you very much. Okay. First of all, I'd raised five principles from the Quran. All those verses that my dear friend Khalid raised can easily be explained and understood with a pluralism vision, with a pluralism view based on these 5 principles. And in one word, I can answer all of them. Like any sort of language, when the context is defined, then any use of the words like alamin, jami'a, etc., will be limited to that context. When I say, are everybody here? I don't mean all human beings. I mean everybody who is supposed to be here. So I'm keen to see what would be Khalid's answers to those 5 principles. But let me say a few things about the points that Khalid raised. First of all, inclusivity, which Yaser also referred to. It's an interesting terminology. I very much like it more than exclusivism. But let's not forget that inclusivity also has exclusivity in it. Because at the end of the day, you are saying that, it's not that everybody is wrong, but everything that is true about others, we have it, and then we have something more. So there is a bit of exclusivity there. There is still a sense of feeling of superiority there, which is fine. But just wanted to clarify that. Khalid seems to invest a lot on Quran being preserved. Well, there are a few things to consider there. Number one is that, please, as a Muslim, I also believe that Quran to much extent is preserved. So I'm not saying the Quran is fabricated or anything. But please do consider that we are saying this in our circle of Muslims. Christians say the same thing about their Bible, and Jews are saying the same thing about their Torah. And all of us, Christian, Jews, and Muslims, if we go and look at the current research in the history of the Quran, we will find that there are actually significant line of scholarship and research that is questioning whether the Quran is fully preserved. I'm not saying they're right, but I'm just saying that let's just consider that. So just us sitting here and say, if you say the Quran is preserved, is easy. Number two, it's not really, my dear Khalid, it's not really about preserved. See, religion is not a course. Quran is not a textbook. It is not like we have the textbook, others do not have a textbook. It's the question of interpretation. That's the thing. Whether the Quran is preserved or not is one issue. Whether we actually understand the meaning of the Quran, that's another issue. I still remember when I was having the privilege of talking with your very, very dear teacher, Khalid Ahmadi, one of the conversations that we had was that how is it possible that all Muslims have misunderstood the Quran so far? And how can we fix that? And one of the answers that Ustad Khalid gave me was that, well, hopefully with the writings that people like me, meaning Mr. Khalid, are doing, the true meaning of Quran will flesh out. And as you know, there are others who also claim that they know the meaning of the Quran. So which Quran are we talking about? Which Islam are we talking about? Yaser is coming from Shia background. Khalid is coming from Sunni background. Which Islam are we talking about? Which Quran are we talking about? So this much investment on Quran being preserved, assuming it is true, and as a Muslim we just say yes, it's true. I don't think it has much substance here in terms of implication for exclusivity. Khalid said that, well, you know, a prophet needs to start from somewhere. It needs to start from a language, of course, so there's no other way out of it. Two things about that. Number one, okay, let's say that is true, and I have a question about that, but why the language and why the structure needs to be so difficult to understand? Let's just compare Quran with Bible. You can give the book of Bible to anybody. They read it, they understand it. I'm not saying that they understand the depth of it, but they understand it. Quran, I would like to bring from your own teacher, Khalid. Ustad Khalid himself was advising me that if you want to give Quran to somebody to read, don't give him the entire Quran, because he will be confused and he may even misguide it. Give him the parts that you think would make sense. So, okay, language would be an issue, but why making it in that way? And okay, my time is over. Just one sentence. The very sentence that The very sentence that, well, there needs to be one place and then one prophet going there with a certain language is coming from the assumption that the only way that people are guided is by Abrahamic religions. In a way, we are begging the question by bringing that argument. I would say there could be numerous other ways that God could have done it if our only understanding of guidance of God is that He is the one who sends prophet.
Okay, so before going into inter-panel discussion, if I may interfere only to suggest a topic for you to discuss it further in free debate or inter-panel discussion, so far as I said, it becomes clear that there are some Quranic verses presumably supporting exclusivism or inclusive exclusivism, the moderate form of exclusivism, and there are some Quranic verses that support pluralism. So what should we do? I mean, are you suggesting a hermeneutical methodology, a way to interpret the Quran to actually, remove that kind of presumable inconsistency between these two kinds of Quranic verses, or you have a kind of very rationalist position to the effect that if something like this, seemingly contradictory Quranic verses happen, then we should actually come up with a aqli, independent, rational solution to that problem. So you can, if you want, please address this kind of methodological point. Know that we have heard the opening statement and the rejoinders from the both sides. It's time for inter-panel discussion, or if you prefer, you can call it the free debate. During this stage, debater may engage more dynamically, including brief, interjections or interruptions when necessary. However, the discussion should remain orderly and genuinely two-way. The VGR floor is now open for 30 minutes of intra-panel discussion, so we can discuss. And please, if you find it interesting, please address the point that I've also suggested. Yeah. So there is no order. If you want to discuss, then discuss. Yeah, please.
Let me then, Khalid, do you mind if or do you want to go first, Khalid?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. In fact, what you said, Yaser, and you said this in the last round as well, that there seems to be contradicting verses. That goes back to what I talked about at my opening statements about methodology. Often, not just in the debate about pluralism and exclusivism or inclusivism, in almost any debate on the Quran, often the way that people do it is that they bring verses, individual verses, and as if it's a war and battle between verses. So I throw 3 verses, let's see what verses you have. Oh, in this battle my verses may win or they may lose. This discussion, I think the assumption is that at least in the concept, Quran is coherent and there shouldn't be any contradiction in it. So the way that I see it is that it's not battle of verses. It's actually a competition between narratives. So I have a narrative from the Quran. I have understood a narrative from the Quran, which is pluralism narrative. Khalid has understood a narrative from the Quran that seems to be inclusivist narrative. This narrative needs to be coherent inside, so it needs to be able to explain all the verses of the Quran. I argue that my narrative easily explains all the verses of the Quran, including the ones that Khalid brought, and if there's time I can go to any and each one of them. I'm keen to see how Khalid will use his narrative to explain those 5 principles that I talked about. And let me also say that those 5 principles, for each one of them I brought 1 verse, but in the English article that I wrote, I brought something around 30 verses that are about these principles. In the Persian Farsi article that I wrote later, I brought something around 100 verses that are about these principles. Okay, so it's interesting to see how it's going to be. The yeah. The train of thought just oh yes, so I said it needs to be internally coherent, but it also needs to be aligned with the evidence, aligned with the theology of the Quran. So theology of the Quran that we talked about, that if God is wise, was this the best way to guide human beings? I would like to see how narrative that Khalid presents can explain that. And answers like, well, it needs to start from somewhere, it needs to start from a language, I think is begging the question. I think I need to stop because I would like to hear from Khalid as well.
I think one point I agree with is whatever we say has to be consistent. And when we say consistent, when I say consistent, I mean that the presentation should not make the Quran appear as verses that are contradicting. The Quran itself mentions in verse 82 of Surah number 4 that one reason why the Quran has to be accepted as the book of the Almighty is they will not find any contradiction. Had it been from anyone other than God, لَوَجَدُوا فِيهِ اخْتِلَافًا كَثِيرًا. So I think whether we approach it from one point of view or the other, the attempt should be to find out the explanation or a narrative that is explaining each and every verse. And I also emphasize the same point, each and every verse. Uh, let's not talk about 5 points or 25 points or 250 points. That I think sometimes is done in debates to make the other point of view look smaller or weaker. Let's talk about points. Okay, I take one of them. You mentioned that the Quran says it's a local mission, al Qura. Well, that's one verse. I mentioned another verse, and you said that it lil alamina nazira and inni rasulullahi ilaykum ya ayyuhan nas inni rasulullahi ilaykum jamiyan also means the same people of Mecca. Uh, I think that's not the case. I said the Quran is a very clear book. When it says litunzira al qura waman hawlaha, it's actually mentioning it that it is al Qura and people around it. And obviously, this is the first part of the mission. That's where it's going to start from. And then it's going to proceed to justify the rest of what the Quran is mentioned. Every community had a messenger. That's a very important point. I want it to be understood properly. It could either mean, like probably what uh, Farhad is suggesting, that every community, let's define what the community we are talking about is are the communities, let's say, living in Iran or Pakistan, what are they, 100,000 people or what? Obviously, when the Quran says وَلِكُلِّ قَوْمٍ هَادٍ وَلِكُلِّ قَوْمٍ رَسُولٍ, we have to define it. And if we are saying it as if it's a principle that is suggesting that for until the day of judgment it's going to happen, then let's find out where it's happening. The only understanding that I think is making sense is that the Almighty is telling us that before Abraham, uh, the prophets that came, the messengers that came, they came to their respective nations, which were communities that were scattered. The means of transportation and communication were very primitive. And God arranged for each of those nations to have one messenger. And the job was done, the message was delivered. And then by God's design, they all scattered, migrated to different parts of the world. And now we can say that each one of them, sometime earlier in their history, they had their respective messages, which obviously, with the passage of time, they get altered, diluted, and they become different. So It's either that you're saying that this process is continuing till date, or it's actually the process that the Almighty started. And then later on, the Quran itself tells us in verse 33 of Surah 3 that this process then was confined to the family of Abraham. In Allah astafa Adam wa Nuhan wa ala Ibrahim. So it was after that, it was the progeny of Abraham that was given that task. So, that is how it is explained. Languages are different, most certainly they are different. The Almighty appreciates them. The Almighty mentions it as one of his signs. But what does it mean? Obviously, uh, if there was any way of coming up with one message that had all languages included in its scope, it would have been done. But that's not how the Almighty arranged. There is one language, and the language then gets translated. Even if you know the language, Arabic language, you still, as you rightly pointed out, Farhad, there are differences. Differences, I'm telling you, is a part of the test, part of the design. That is, you will understand things differently. A lot of character, a lot of sense of proper understanding and commitment is tested, and nobody can claim your humbleness is also tested. Some people can be arrogant to say that what I am saying is the right understanding and all others are wrong. So languages are there, and they are also a test. But obviously, you have to. Sometimes when you're debating, you have a preemptive strike, like Farhad did, and he said that don't give me this answer. Well, that's the only answer. My friend, that's the only answer. That it has to start from one language which is going to be considered as basic, like Hebrew in the case of Bible, in the case of the Old Testament, Aramaic in the case of Gospels. It had to be Arabic in the case of the Quran, and then it had to be translated. And I would emphasize what you said. What you said, uh, I do understand that it is inclusivity, and then it's exclusivity. Okay, I do understand what you're saying, but at the end of the day, it is your position in the next life which is going to decide whether you have succeeded or not. I firmly believe that a person who has not been properly introduced to the Quran and Islam and stays a non-Muslim and does his best to understand whatever the truth is going to end up far better than most Muslims within Islam. That's not the issue. The issue is that the Almighty, when He has sent down His message, and you said, well, there is a dispute about whether the Quran is fully preserved or not. Well, I'm saying it from the understanding that I have the Quran and I'm talking to you as a Muslim with my understanding. I'm not taking into account the understanding of all those people who have criticized my point of view. When I'm going to talk to them, well, I'm going to talk to them with the kind of arguments they're going to present to me. But right now, what I'm saying is that my understanding of the Quran, which most Muslims share, that it is fully preserved, it's the last book of the Almighty. It was designed for no other reason but the fact that from now on, this message has to be delivered to everyone with this confidence that this is the ultimate final book and it has been preserved. How? Let us let us show it to you. Come to us, and we'll show it to you how it's being recited by people, and how even if a mistake is committed, it is corrected. I'm not too sure whether I'm being heard because I don't see any other faces. Uh, okay, now, now I'm confident. I'm talking to Frank. Oh my goodness. I thought I'm talking to myself. Right.
No, no,
So
no, no, that's okay.
I finished.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay, on.
before going any further, just a quick interference.
Yeah.
It seems to me that Khalid is taking a kind of, one might say, a combinatory or complicated position to the effect that he is salvific pluralist. Salvific means salvation related, in the sense that if someone is truth seeker in his to, I mean, his or her ultimate capacity, then one is not doomed. But at the same time, Khalid is alethic exclusivist. Alethic, alethic means truth related. When it comes to truth, he is exclusivist. Of course, a moderate form of exclusivism, which is inclusivism. So I think as far as salvific pluralism is concerned, both sides of debate agree with each other. I mean, so the main point. Oh, okay, no, okay. So please unmute. Yeah, please, Farhad, go ahead.
Um, Before I try to answer to some of the points that Khalid made, in order to really know if on salvific pluralism we are on the same line, I want to ask a very quick question from Khalid. And Khalid, if you can answer that just in one sentence to leave me some time, please, to try to answer some of your points. I appreciate that. So, dear Khalid, when you say that people will be judged based on their conditions, and of course, if they are Muslims, they still have chance for success in the hereafter, and they may even end up in much better places than any Muslims. Could you let me know that if we say, because as you know from the Qur'an, we can also understand this, that there are different levels of success in the hereafter. Let's say in heaven, for instance, are different levels, as you can derive it from the Qur'an. Do you think that non-Muslims who are doing best in whatever path they are doing very honestly, do you think that they will have chance to reach the highest levels of heaven that Muslims can also reach? I would like to see if your answer is yes or no to that.
Absolutely, yes, absolutely. If it is
Okay.
a no, I'll be a terribly confused person, and probably I'll have to revisit all my understanding of religion.
If your answer is yes, why would I want to convince somebody to become Muslim if they are doing very well in their own path? Why do I want to put them in the danger of completing Itmam al-Hujjah for them and convince them that you need to come here? And every human being has some ego. Why should I convince them about that? They are already doing well. I don't want you to answer that, because then it will take more time from me, and I want to address some of the points. I'm sure you will have time to answer it a little bit later. Let me just go through some of the points that you also made. Very quickly about the preservation of the Quran. I know it's not that much relevant to our discussion, but just let's consider and understand that the verse that you referred to, إِنَّا نَحْنُ نَزَّلْنَا الذِّكْرَ وَإِنَّا لَهُ لَحَافِظُونَ, it is, when we look at the context of the verse, it is talking about revelation from up there to the heart of the Prophet Muhammad. It says that this channel is safe. This is also the interpretation that your Ustad Javed Ahmed Hamidi has provided when I was discussing with him. Of course, he then argues that we can then extend Hafidun to mean more than that, but that's another thing. When you said the most interesting thing that you said, and I think that helps me to try to answer you, was that you said, well, this is the only answer, that there needs to be a prophet, needs to be sent to some place, there needs to be a language, and that's the only answer. And that's exactly where the difference between our understanding is. And that goes back to what Yaser was referring to, that there are two aspects in pluralism. One of them is about salvation, the other one is about understanding of the truth. I think the way that my brother Khalid is thinking about this is that there's only one way to understand the truth, and that is the way that Abrahamic religions have it, and that is that this truth is what we refer to it as God. And there's only one understanding of this God, and that is what Abrahamic religions has provided. He creates, he puts us under challenge, ibtila, I prefer to call it challenge rather than test, and then in the day of judgment, he judges, puts us in hell and heaven. And that there's no other way that people can reach success in the hereafter. Well, that is what I mean by begging the question, which means that we first consider the Quran to be an exclusive understanding of the truth, Then based on that assumption, we derive something from the Quran. And then when pluralism questions come up, we say, well, the Quran says that and there's no other way. I think there are many, many other ways, and there are other ways. So let me answer your questions. First of all, the question you're asking me, well, are you then saying that when the Quran says every community has a messenger, so where are these messengers? First of all, I think that question is more towards Khalid's narrative, because the explanation that Khalid provides, and I know from where that explanation is coming, I think it's a very difficult explanation. The Quran has given numerous verses that says لِكُلِّ أُمَّةٍ رَسُولٌ. And then the explanation that the narrative of Khalid provides us is that, oh, that was only up to the coming of Prophet Ibrahim. After that, everything changed. So nobody knows Prophet Ibrahim, according to Muslims, how many years he was before Prophet. Let's say 5,000 years, for instance. So the Quran is insisting on principle that was, according to narratives of Khalid, abrogated 5,000 years ago. That doesn't make sense. The other thing is that nowhere in the Quran it says explicitly that we have not changed this. It only makes sense for the Quran that you say is very clear. It only makes sense that when it says وَلِكُلِّ أُمَّةٍ رَسُولٌ, it then says, however, after Prophet Ibrahim, we changed this rule. We don't have it. Ali Ibrahim, all of these can be referred to the prophets. So it's just one interpretation to think that Ali Ibrahim would mean Ummah. So then, I don't think the answer that Khalid brings to this question of whether every community has prophet or not satisfies and is aligned with the Quran. My answer is as follows. As Yaser pointed out, my pluralism is both on understanding the truth and the pluralism of salvation. Okay? So, to me, the image that the Quran is giving us is a very local image, much more than we were taught traditionally. It's a very local image. The Quran, the outside world is totally absent from the Quran. And this is not a weakness of the Quran. This is the strength of the Quran, for a book that, according to my understanding, its mission was for the local people. So when it says لِكُلِّ أُمَّةٍ رَسُولٌ, it is talking about the Ummah in Abrahamic religions from the time of the Noah, and then of course from Ibrahim, of course, and then to the Prophet, and these Rasul have been named in the Quran. So there's no contradiction there. No, that doesn't mean that today we need to find Rasul in every community, because that principle is within the local narrative of the Quran for Abrahamic religions. I do not consider prophets to be the only way that human beings can be guided. I think the evidence that we see today around us shows us that people are not depending on a particular religion with prophet in order to have high spirituality, and I think there are many ways by which people can reach salvation. The word Alameen and Jami'a, I really don't want to spend too much time on this, because these are they're very clear things. I mean, the word Alameen, Khalid himself said that these words can have different meanings based on the context. First of all, Alameen, as far as I know, and I did a little bit of research on this, Khalid, in the past, trying to find the word Alameen in Ash'ar al-Jahiliyyah, the poems of time of ignorance, and I didn't find it. And I read somewhere that the word Alameen is actually a Quranic word. Quran has used it, so it needs to be understood by the Quran. And I looked at all the verses of the Quran where the word Alameen is being used, and I think the best translation of that would be everybody, everyone. And therefore it will have a meaning within the context. I just give you one example, and then I want to stop because I don't want to take too much of your time. I want to hear more of what you say. For instance, وَنَجَّيْنَاهُ وَلُوتًا إِلَى الْأَرْضِ الَّتِي بَارَكْنَا فِيهَا لِلْعَالَمِينَ. Okay, so here Zamakhshari says يُرَاد الْكَسْرَةِ meaning many people. Al-Ghunawi says, فَإِنَّهُ ذَكَرَ الْعَالَمِينَ وَالْمُرَادُ بِهِ أَهْلِ الشَّامِ. The verse says Alamin, but the meaning of it is Sham, people in Syria at the time. So all these verses and Nas and Jamia, all of these within the context will have a local meaning. And the word Jamia is not a word that can break out from this context. I encourage the listeners to search for the word Jamia in the Quran, and you will find that the word Jamia has been used for small group, bigger group, and all that. I would like to hear Khalid, so I stop here.
Just a quick reminder, we have got only 7 minutes to wrap up. Please.
Okay, the first question first. You see, if according to my understanding, a person who is not a Muslim and is doing well, um, he can attain as high levels of the paradise as any Muslim. Why on earth am I going to trouble him by approaching him with the message of Islam? Well, for the reason that I am convinced that this is a message of God meant for him too, and I will approach him with this good feeling for him that since he has already done well in whatever he had with him, I will give him an opportunity to do even better. So I, with the message that I believe is meant for not only me, but for everybody else, when I see somebody doing so well morally and spiritually, I'll be strongly inclined to ask him to take up this understanding as a potential way of making him go for even higher levels. He will not be endangered at all. His progress will not be threatened. There could be two possibilities. Either I will present it to him properly, and he will accept it and achieve a higher level, or else I will not be able to do well, and he will be safe, no problems with him. So I think in either case, it's not a problem. I'm not too sure why this preservation has been emphasized so much. If there are other people who don't believe it's preserved, it's their point of view. But what I'm saying is, which was not properly, I would say, appreciated. I see with my eyes, with my experience every year. I don't want to go into books. I see it through experience. That is the brilliance of both Quran and Sunnah, getting fully preserved in a way that you don't have to go to the research of people and statements like our friend Farhad has mentioned that this verse is mentioned with this meaning by with this particular exegete. You see with your own eyes that the Quran is being read out, the same Quran all over the world, and any mistakes are corrected. So let's not talk about it now. When we talk about the fact that there are other ways of also achieving spirituality that is mentioned in the Quran. The Quran tells us that the Wahi, divine revelation of the Almighty, is not the only source of guidance for humans. In fact, the first source of guidance is human nature, wherein the Almighty has instilled فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا. So the ability to distinguish right from wrong, the light is there within us, all humans. And if somebody is giving importance to that light, which I'm sure in every community, in every society of the world, there are good people, and if they are going to pursue with that light and make sure that they are doing as best as they can to respond to the voice of their conscience and respond to the challenges of the times in the positive way, they are not only going to have salvation, they are going to have very high ranks of rewards from the Almighty. But the Almighty Himself, by responding in the form of formal Wahi, formal books and prophets, has given an additional reason for that inner light to get further confirmed. So they both go hand in hand. If there are conflicts, if there are challenges, well, the Quran tells us that challenges and conflicts are there to enable us to progress even further. They're not meant for us to be bogged down. So these differences are there so that people are able to engage with each other. They are able to talk to each other politely, like hopefully we are doing right now, and be able to listen to each other and understand each other's point of view so that we are given the opportunity to revisit our understanding and refine and improve. When prophets are there, the ultimate decision of the Almighty is mentioned clearly. And obviously, there is no room for making any, coming up with any disputes. But later on, the scheme of the Almighty most certainly takes a different form. Now you do interpret, but interpret doesn't really mean your whims, no matter what comes to your mind. It's a very serious matter. It's something that involves your honesty, your dedication, your ability to look at what you have understood over and over again. People get biased, which is obviously a weakness, and you are influenced by your circumstances. God knows how much of your limitation is what was beyond your ability to control, and what was something that you could have actually overcome. So this test is always there, and obviously, had the prophets not been there, we would not have had the direction that this whole test is meant for the ultimate goal to be successful in the next life. Obviously, we don't have time to talk about these matters, but most certainly, I would like to point out that, if this thesis of pluralism is accepted as is being strongly emphasized by my friend Farhad, then obviously what it means is that whatever is going on in the name of religion everywhere is worthy of respect. The Quran, we know, very strongly condemns uh, ascribing partners to the Almighty. Um, we know that in some part of the world, statues are still getting worshipped. We know
Just
that
10 seconds,
a
please.
large number of people are actually considering Jesus as the Son of God. So all this really gets sanctioned because
Thank you.
different people have different religions, and all of them have to be respected.
Thank you. Okay.
Yasser, I would like just a couple of minutes to address a few points, if you don't mind, before concluding remarks. Is it possible?
Can you make it few seconds, please, because we are running out of time. Very short, please.
Okay, very short. I agree with Khalid. The preservation of the Quran is not really the topic of debate here. Whether the Quran is 100% preserved or partially, I think it is not going to be an argue against or for either pluralism or exclusivism or inclusivism. Um, 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 I believe if the Khalid is still talking from within the local image that Quran is giving us. I believe if God's guidance was supposed to be its best way by sending prophets, number one, he would still send prophets. He would not exclude those prophets to the Middle East, and the office of prophethood would not be ended. Um, um, and the last point that Khalid made about pluralism, I'm not believing that every religion is correct. Pluralism does not mean that. Every pluralism has some conditions in it. So pluralism has a ceiling, just as exclusivism has a bottom line. So that's not what I'm saying. And the last point, Yaser, that because Khalid said earlier that when I mentioned 5 points, this might be seen as me trying to say there's a strong argument here. That is not my intention. I really believe that Quran has established these 5 points with many verses, and I'm still keen to see a follower of exclusivist or inclusivist approach addressing these 5 principles in a way. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay. So let us hear now from Farhad. his closing statement,
Oh,
please.
with me, or
Yeah.
okay, okay. I do my closing statements. I would like to quote from a very great scholar that Khalid knows very well. He's Hamid ad-Din Farahi, who died in 1930. He's teacher of Amin Ahsan Islahi and Javed Ahmed Ghamidi, both of them great scholars. I've learned a lot from them, and I know Khalid is in their students. Hamid ad-Din Farahi says, when he talks about the jihad at the time of the Prophet, and when he talks about the assumed letters that the Prophet sent to the neighborhood, and I'm happy to talk about that in question and answer if it is raised, he says that for jihad فوجب القتال لا للدفاع بل لفتح الكعبة ثم لرد الحنيفية في أولاد إسماعيل. So he says that this is in Tafsir Nizam al-Qur'an, page 54 and 55. He says that God has made jihad and fighting with kuffar obligatory only for two reasons. It's not for defending, it's for two reasons. لفتح الكعبة, so that the Mecca and Kaaba can be dominated by Muslims, and number two, لرد حنيفية في أولاد إسماعيل, so that the monotheism can be established in the descendants of Ismail. Then here comes the interesting part. وَأَمَّا بِغَيْرِ ذُرِّيَّةِ إِسْمَاعِيل. However, for other than descendants of Ismail, so that would be other than Arabs of Hijaz, فَلِإِقَامَةِ الْقِسْطِ. It's just for إِقَامَةِ الْقِسْطِ. If there is unfairness somewhere. وَرَفْعَ الْفِسَادِ عَلَى الْأَرْضِ. And for removing fasad, anarchy, from the earth. فَلَا إِكْرَاهَ فِي الدِّينِ لِأَهْلِ الْكِتَابِ. So therefore there is no obligation of this religion for Ahl al-Kitab. وَلِكُلِّ مَنْ لَيْسَ مِنْ ذُرِّيَّةِ إِسْمَاعِيل. And for anyone who is not from the descendants of Ismail, وَعَلَيْهِمُ الْجِزْيَةِ. They just need to pay this due tax. He then says something very interesting, and that's the reason that I think if he was alive today, I think my arguments would have been closer to his thinking, rather than to an inclusivist or exclusivist thinking. وأما ذرية إسماعيل عليهم السلام فهم محجوج عليهم برجل منهم وهو قلبهم ولسانهم. Zurriyat Ismail, the descendants of Ismail, Itmam al-Hujjah had been done for them because they had a person who was coming from themselves, minhum, and from their language, and the rest of it. Okay, I have 2 minutes and a few seconds. My concluding remarks is that what I have seen when I discuss pluralism with my dear friends, including my very dear friend Khalid, I see the same pattern of questions, the same pattern of arguments and reasoning and criticisms come out. What happens, I think, is that there are certain assumptions that our friends hold to be crystal clear and that there's no doubt about them. And then based on those assumptions, of course, when they look at the Qur'an, they will be able to bring some verses and argue that these verses are against pluralism, and not quite pay enough attention to those 5 principles that I talked about. I have listed these assumptions here. I would like to read them one by one. There are 6 assumptions. The first assumption would be that there is only one understanding of that ultimate truth that is the best understanding for success in the hereafter. That is the first assumption. The second assumption is that that understanding has been provided by Abrahamic religions. The third assumption is that God's guidance in its best form is when He sent prophets. Other sorts of guidance, as Khalid says, exist, but it is God's guidance in the sense of in the shape of prophets that would be like superior to anything else. The fourth assumption is that now, Khalid may not hold this one assumption, but as I said, this is my experience with talking with other friends. The fourth assumption is that tazkiyah is purification can only be done by following the rules of Sharia. The fifth assumption is that the rules of Sharia are permanent, and the last assumption, of course, then is that all these prophets came to the Middle East. All the verses that then are provided based on those assumptions are either ignoring those five principles, or they're begging the question, or they have a wrong understanding about pluralism, as I think I got that from Brother Khalid, or they're trying to interpret some words in a way that can inject plural exclusivist view into those words like alamin and jamia. Thank you.
Okay, lovely. Khalid, let us hear your closing statement. 5 minutes, please.
My difficulty in understanding Farhad's presentation is that it seems that there is a philosophical conclusion drawn on the basis of his very keen observation of the world that we are living in. And from that critical understanding, he is looking at the Quran and coming to his conclusions. Uh, Instead of looking at the Quranic message and then answering those questions, these are going to be two different ways of trying to solve what I keep calling the puzzle of this life. This life is a puzzle. It needs to be solved, answered, and I believe that it is answered most clearly by the Quran. He keeps emphasizing that his five questions are not answered. Obviously, we'll need to have a longer debate, not debate, discussion with him. I've already mentioned the fact that languages are different, and obviously they are a part of the design of this life. And had to be one language in which the message would be revealed, and the rest of them, people are going to benefit from it. Likewise, if the Quran appreciates diversity, fine. I had I mentioned or believed in the fact that one person belonging to a community which has a different language, a different background, is at any degree at a disadvantage, then it would have been a problem. Now, I think it was Yaser who mentioned about two different approaches or two different uh, ideas of pluralism. Um, I mean, if somebody uh, has a certain text from the Almighty, which is there with him. Okay, let's assume that he thinks that it's fully preserved and it's from his creator and is giving him a very strong feeling of confidence and attachment to his creator. And there are others who do not have that kind of luxury facility. Um, okay, there is an advantage to one person compared to the other. Let's face it, that these advantages are always there in life, one way or the other, in almost every aspect of life. But that's not important. That is what the Quran keeps emphasizing. What is important is your status in the eyes of our Creator and what you are going to get in the next life. If it has been mentioned in the Quran clearly that the Almighty is fair, He is going to judge all humans on the basis of the principles of justice. I think to believe that the Quran is the message of God preserved, meant for the rest of the mankind to accept and believe in, if it's presented to them properly, there is no problem in it at all, because uh, advantages and disadvantages are going to be there in everything. There has to be one set of clear principles regarding how to worship God, how to uh, go around and do what is required through the law of the Almighty. I'm sure I know Farhad is particularly disturbed by the fact that there are punishments which don't seem to be very acceptable to the modern times. Uh, I don't know how something that was acceptable 1400 years ago in a particular part of Arabian Peninsula would be unacceptable to others. That is what we need to explain. I would explain to everyone. I will try to defend. I'll try to face the criticism of people regarding whatever the Sharia says. But I will mention to the people that look here, God is not confused. When you say that pluralism is the ultimate, what you're saying is that he has no idea, he has no plans. It's all vague. I think he is absolutely clear. He has given a very clear way, but he has also very, through his graciousness, has given this principle that he will look at your position vis-a-vis this message and would decide ultimately as to whether you have ultimately succeeded or failed or succeeded better than others or failed less than others, depending upon your circumstances and the effort you put in.
Thank you. Okay, now we have reached the Q&A part. We have got, I suppose, 15 minutes, and we have got a lot of interesting questions. The first one, the first part of the first question is not actually a question, it's just a position, but I'll read it. I agree with Farhad. Mr. Turabi has written. I agree with Farhad that due to the variety of interpretation, we should avoid using verses from the Quran to support a particular viewpoint. Nevertheless, the following verses indicate that the Quran does not seek to make everyone a Muslim. لا إكراه في الدين ولو شاء ربك لآمن من في الأرض وما جعلناك عليك حفيظا وقل الحق من ربكم ومن شاء فليؤمن ومن شاء فليكفر. This is actually the position part of the question. And then Mr. Trabi follows that. Farhad, do you agree with the following perspective? God did not speak to us in order to present the entirety of his boundless knowledge within the limits of a finite being. Such a task would have been neither possible nor desirable. He gave us the alphabet of understanding and communication, laid the foundation for our journey, and equipped us to follow that path. Otherwise, recording all his knowledge would require books whose ink spanned the seas and pens as numerous as the trees. ولو أنما في الأرض من شجرة أقلام والبحر يمده من بعده سبعة أبحر ما نفذت كلمات الله إن الله عزيز حكيم. With a few initial revelation, he ignited the spark, leaving the rest to humanity so that each person, according to their ability and willingness, may bear the burden of striving for knowledge. Even the second part is not actually a question. I mean, I'm sure Farhad could be as short as saying, yes, I agree. And Khalid would say, maybe no, I don't agree. Yeah, you have to. Sorry.
I would like to say I agree with the gist of what Mr. Trabi said. I agree with the gist of what Mr. Trabi said. And the only thing I want to say, and I don't want to change the topic, and in that this really what I'm about to say relates to one of the earlier debates that Yaser was moderating. I don't even think that God has ever spoken to a human being, because God is not a human being, and there's no way that an infinite being speak with a finite being. God has inspired into human beings so that they understand the truth and get an image of that truth. Of course, I agree that the Quran and other holy books are coming from God, but it's not like God has his mouth in front of the ear of the prophet and says those words. It's the image that prophet gets. And one point that relates to this, and I want to emphasize on that, because I think my dear friend Khalid says that I'm coming from a philosophical perspective. Not really. In both my English and Farsi writing, I've written that, and this is an honest feeling, Khalid, that I'm sharing with you. I understood pluralism from the Quran. I didn't understand it from philosophy. Of course, when I understood it from the Quran, then I was interested in the philosophy as well. I was trying to then see, okay, what philosophers have to say about it. But as far as I can say, I understood it from the Quran, and the very fact that when I look at the Quran, I find that the history that the Quran is talking about, the kind of science that the Quran is talking about, the news of the world that the Quran is giving, all are very, very local, tells me that this is one understanding of the truth that is presented and has been taken by the Prophet Muhammad, and it's not the ultimate truth, and that the other things are wrong.
Okay. And the second question is, addressed to Khalid. The question is from Mr. Wasim. Could Dr. Khalid share his understanding of chapter 2, verse 62, to the effect that whether you're a Jew, Christian, or Sabaean, if you believe in God, day of judgment, and does good deeds, you will attain salvation? Why does the Quran praise people of the book in chapter 3, verse 199? Why the Quran allow Muslims to eat food of people of Ahlul Kitab and marry them? And why after conquest of Arabia they are allowed to continue to practice their religion and preserve their places of worship?
Wasim, I have realized that debating is not my forte. So when an intelligent, wise person like Farhad is in front of me, I just am not able to put together my thoughts. But now let me remind you, Wasim, that before I answer your question, uh, there was a question asked before your question, which was giving an impression that let's not talk about the Quran. You know why? Because every verse can be interpreted differently. So maybe come up with some book of philosophy, maybe some come up with some intelligent discussion. Leave aside the Quran because let's face it, the Quran can be interpreted differently. So that was my impression that I got from the first statement, which I was not asked to respond to. Although I agree with the second part of what he said, that most certainly the Quran has only given the alphabets, and we have been asked to move on and achieve as best as we can. I want to tell you, Wasim, and I want to share what you already believe in, that the Quran actually condemns both mushrikeen and Ahl al-Kitab kuffar. إن الذين كفروا من أهل الكتاب والمشركين في نار جهنم خالدين فيها أولئك هم شر البرية. Let me translate it. Obviously, some people might say that its translation is also subject to interpretation, but let me give my understanding of the verse. Indeed, those people who have committed kufr from amongst the people of the book and the polytheists, they are going to be consigned to the hellfire. They will reside therein forever. They are the worst creatures. Now, that is the starting point of my answer. Now, let me come to the verse that you have said, you've referred to. Wasim, when a Jew or a Christian or, you know, a Majusi, no, not Majusi, in the Lazina Amanu, Lazina Adu, Sabian, when they are following their own respective religions, believing in God and the life hereafter, and doing good deeds, and not committing kufr. You see, I mentioned the fact that we should not make the Quran appear as a book with statements that are contradicting each other. The two verses, the verse that I quoted from Surah 98, verse 6, condemning kuffar, and this verse both have to be accepted in a way that both make sense simultaneously. So now this verse that you have asked me to talk about is saying that if these people were not presented with the message of the Quran in a way that it became clear to them that it was meant for them to believe in, and they did not reject it, They had an excuse. They could not understand it properly, and they believed in God and the life hereafter and did good deeds. They are eligible for the paradise. But let me say one thing more. Somebody who truly believes in God cannot reject any of his messengers if the message is properly presented. I keep telling people that, people consider United States of America as a power, superpower. If the president of America sends his whoever, somebody he has appointed to meet another person, to meet a head of the state of a country, would he say, no, I'm sorry, I'm not going to accept him? So God sends his messenger for the purpose that the messenger is recognized, acknowledged, and respected. That is what belief is. But
Yeah.
if that is not happening and the message was not clearly communicated, he has an excuse. And being a Christian or a Jew or
Mhm.
somebody else and believing in God and the hereafter and good deeds will give him salvation.
Thank you. The next question is addressed to Farhad. My question is to Dr. Shafti. Since we have a 15 to 20% of world population as polytheists, will it be correct to say that a good polytheist religious person will also reach highest level of heaven? I found it difficult to include polytheism in the pluralism of the Quran, as the language of the Quran is so much against shirk. Will appreciate comments on that. Thank you. Very
Thank you.
quickly and shortly, please.
Thank you very much, Abdul. Very quickly, in response to the first question by Mr. Trabi, I forgot to say one important point, which I think is agreement between Khalid and I. I do believe we can use the verses of the Quran to understand Islam. I'm not of the belief that we should not use verses of the Quran, otherwise we needn't have this debate. But what I'm saying is that we need to bring narratives from the Quran, not individual verses. That's what I'm saying. Now to this question, my dear brother Abdul, I think both Khalid and myself perhaps have similar answer to that. La yukallifu Allahu nafsan illa wus'aha. Why your name is Abdul? Why you are Muslim? Why am I Muslim? Why is Khalid or Yaser Muslim? Because we were born in a Muslim country, in a Muslim community. Imagine a mushrik who is born in a mushrik family. God has made him born in that family. If we look at the understanding of God that comes from the Quran, how is it fair that he will be punished in the hereafter if otherwise he's doing righteous things and doing everything? So it goes back to what is the consequence of that shirk. If that shirk has bad moral implications, causes the person to do evil things, then of course he will be in trouble in the hereafter, not because of shirk itself, but because of the consequences of that. But if the shirk is just something in theory, and really he's the righteous person and he believes in one ultimate God or something like that, I don't see any reason to believe that he will be punished. I encourage you to read Surah Al-Ma'idah, verses 118 and 119. That even the Christians who consider Jesus and his mother to be God says, قَالَ هَذَا يَوْمُ يَنْفَعُ الصَّادِقِينَ صِدْقُهُم. That honesty will help them. So that would be my answer. But one interesting thing has nothing to do with discussion about pluralism. I haven't seen in the stories of the prophets in the Quran that go to their people, I haven't seen a story where the only problem that those people have is shirk. It is always also something wrong with their moral attitude. I think that's interesting.
Yeah. And the last question is again addressed to Farhad. So, from the perspective of most tafsir scholars, the relationship between divine religions is longitudinal, i.e., evolutionary, not co-occurrence. Each law is a proof in its own era, and with the advent of the next law, a new proof replaces the previous one. Ultimately, the final Islam is dominant and abrogates the previous laws. Verse 262 negates the equality of religious labels and sets the criterion for salvation as true faith plus righteous deeds. but this verse does not prove the co-occurrence of laws forever. I would like Farhad to comment on this.
Okay.
And
So just
this question is asked by iPhone. That's the title of the one who asked.
are you
Thank
adver-
you, iPhone.
are you advertising for iPhone, Yaser? Now?
No, no, the one who asked has that title. That's
Okay.
iPhone.
Okay.
Thank
All
you,
right. Right.
iPhone.
Oh, thank you, iPhone. Thank you, iPhone. Okay. So first of all, the first, before answering your question directly, just one thing, with Khalid also made reference to it. It is important for us friends to understand that there are different views about whether the legal Sharia of Islam, in particular the social part of it and the penal law, was meant to be permanent, or was it just for that particular society? There are scholars who have very exclusivist view about religion, much more than Khalid. Khalid is inclusivist. There are scholars who are exclusivist, but yet believe that the social Sharia, penal Sharia, was not supposed to be for other nations or for later times. So that's one thing. But my dear brother iPhone, or sister iPhone, you say that in the tafsir interpretations, this is what you find there. But come on, of course, 99% of Muslims, if not more, in answering the question of this debate, will agree with Khalid. That's the dominating view. Of course, I am talking about the other view. And what I can tell you is that I have no idea how they have managed to have come up with that understanding when there are explicit verses of the Quran that actually says otherwise. I just read one of them that I read before. لِكُلٍّ جَعَلْنَا مِنْكُمْ شِرْعَةً وَمِنْهَاجًا وَلَوْ شَاءَ اللَّهُ لَجَعَلَكُمْ أُمَّةً وَاحِدَةً. Before that, in verse Ma'idah 43, it says to the Jews, وَكَيْفَ يُحَكِّمُونَكَ وَعِنْدَهُمُ التَّوْرَاةُ. Why they're asking you to do ruling for them? They have Torah. فِيهَا حُكْمُ اللَّهِ. Hukm Allah is there. In verse 47, وَلْيَحْكُمْ أَهْلُ الْإِنْجِيلِ بِمَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ فِيهِ. The people who follow Injil needs to do ruling based on Injil. All of these were at the time when the Prophet was existing. So I'm afraid, in my understanding, the Quran goes against what you presented, dear iPhone.
Yeah, before wrapping it up, I just wanted to make a short concluding remark. It becomes clear from this very interesting debate that both sides of this debate, i.e., exclusivistic position, moderate or otherwise, I mean, by moderate exclusivism, I mean inclusivism, the exclusivist part and the pluralist part, both have a challenge. Because if the moderate exclusivistic part, like Khalid, accepts the full salvation for non-Muslims, then why bother concerning with truth? If you can attain knowledge, if you can attain salvation without truth, then why bother with truth? On the other hand, if full salvation can be attained without truth, then why bother with the divine guidance in the form of truth? So that last point is a challenge for pluralistic position, and the previous point is a challenge for, of course, the exclusivistic form. And of course, the non-moderate form of exclusivism, which very wisely Khalid didn't take, has a challenge of capacity. I mean, if someone is not in one's capacity to accept the truths of Islam, so it would be unfair for that person to be actually punished in the hereafter. So it seems that we have to accept full salvation position, and then we have either truth position or full salvation position, and these two sides cannot be very easily reconciled. And interestingly, this discussion started off as kind of spiritual and scriptural citation, but end up being more rationalistic. And I think, Khalid, that is the nature of discussion, because if there are a number of verses that seem contradictory, then we have to find a rationalistic way to reconcile the two, and that is actually inevitable. That was very interesting debate. Of course, we cannot continue it just like now, but on behalf of the Islamic Cultural Center of Northern California, ICCNC, I would like to thank Dr. Khalid Zaheer and Dr. Farhad Shafti for this very intriguing debate. And also, I would like to thank the people in the audience, wherever you are. If you are interested in this kind of debate, under the debate series, as I mentioned before, Belief and Unbelief in a Post-Secular Era, please stay tuned. Each season, inshallah, we'll have one such debate. It is always free, no registration is needed. Thank you, Dr. Farhad Shafti. Thank you, Dr. Khalid Zaheer. And I hope to see you, inshallah, dear audiences, again soon. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaikum salam.
Waalaikum assalam wa
Thank you very
rahmatullahi wa
much.
Thank you very
barakatuh.
much.
Thank you.
All the best.
Thank you.